One sentence was all it took to divide the most powerful women inside the monarchy. In a private Windsor reception, surrounded by senior aides and members of the royal household, Duchess Sophie turned toward Catherine and declared, with Camilla only feet away, "I will always stand beside Catherine, not Camilla." The room fell silent. Charles stopped speaking. William's expression hardened, and Camilla, visibly stunned, realized this was not simply a declaration of friendship, it was a public choice of loyalty. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had arranged the small gathering after a charitable reception at Windsor Castle. The king wanted the evening to project calm unity after weeks of tension between separate royal households. A royal household is the team of aides and officials serving an individual member of the family. William, Catherine, Edward, Sophie, Camilla, and selected staff had remained behind, but the polite atmosphere was already fragile. Camilla raised the issue during a discussion about Catherine's future public role. The Queen Consort asked whether Sophie had become too closely aligned with the Princess of Wales. Her tone remained controlled, yet everyone understood the challenge beneath it. The Duchess answered immediately, "I will always stand beside Catherine, not Camilla." Camilla's smile vanished. She placed her glass on a nearby table and said nothing, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed the shock. Sophie had not merely defended a relative, she had chosen Catherine's side in front of Charles, turning a private concern into an open declaration. Catherine looked shaken rather than victorious. She lowered her eyes, tightened her grip around her evening bag, and quietly told Sophie that she did not want anyone forced to choose between family members. The future queen understood that loyalty offered in public could protect her, but it could also deepen divisions she had spent months trying to contain. Charles glanced toward his wife and then toward Sophie. The monarch offered no defense. His silence transformed an uncomfortable remark into something more serious, because the king, who could have ended the confrontation instantly, allowed the words to remain unchallenged. William showed little surprise. Earlier that evening, the prince had thanked Sophie privately for supporting Catherine during palace planning meetings where she had felt isolated. His controlled reaction suggested the alliance already existed, only its public admission was new. Sophie then moved one chair closer to Catherine. The scrape across the floor broke the silence and confirmed what her words had begun. Camilla left without saying goodbye. One senior aide followed, carrying news of an older confrontation that explained everything. Sophie's declaration had shocked the room, but the pain behind it could only be understood by examining what Catherine, Camilla, and Sophie each believed they were fighting to protect. To the public, Catherine, Camilla, and Sophie stood together beneath palace balconies, procession canopies, and cathedral lights. Behind closed doors, however, each woman carried a different understanding of duty. Catherine represented the monarchy's future. Camilla guarded the authority she had fought decades to obtain. Sophie had spent years becoming the family's dependable peacemaker. But when loyalty to the institution began conflicting with loyalty to a person, Sophie discovered that remaining neutral was no longer an honorable choice. Catherine's position carried consequences far beyond her own comfort. As William's wife, and the mother of George, Charlotte, and Louis, she had become central to the monarchy's long-term stability. Continuity means the smooth transfer of royal duty from one generation to the next, and every attempt to weaken her influence risked unsettling the family expected to carry the crown forward. Sophie understood that pressure because she had earned trust differently. The Duchess completed difficult duties without demanding attention, while her marriage to Edward placed her close enough to understand how palace alliances formed. Her quieter profile also gave Catherine something rare, a relationship in which she could speak without feeling managed. Camilla carried another kind of burden. The Queen Consort had spent years fighting hostility and proving her place beside Charles. Yet Catherine's rising popularity unsettled her. Admiration seemed to reach the younger woman naturally, while Camilla believed her own acceptance had been purchased through humiliation, patience, and sacrifice. Catherine revealed the depth of her exhaustion in a private conversation before the reception. She told Sophie that every suggestion she made was being interpreted as a challenge to Camilla. The princess blinked back tears, smoothed her dress, and prepared to face the gathering as though nothing had happened. Sophie watched her recover, and understood how often dignity was being mistaken for weakness. The trusted confidant had already noticed a pattern. Catherine was repeatedly excluded from discussions concerning royal women's patronages, charitable roles officially supported by members of the family. Each absence was explained as administrative, yet every decision reduced her voice while increasing Camilla's control. Months earlier, after one especially cold palace meeting, Sophie had taken Catherine's hands and made a private promise documented in her personal account. "You will not stand alone again." Her Windsor declaration was not an impulsive outburst. It was the fulfillment of that vow. Edward found Sophie alone shortly before the reception. She asked whether loyalty became cowardice when it demanded silence. He answered that silence sometimes protected peace but sometimes protected the wrong person. The reception may have exposed the division, but the point of no return had come weeks earlier, around a polished table, where Catherine first understood that her place was being deliberately narrowed. The crisis did not begin with Sophie's declaration. It began inside a private Buckingham Palace conference room, where Catherine arrived expecting a discussion about cooperation and left believing she had been carefully pushed aside. No voices were raised, no accusations were shouted. Yet one calculated sentence from Camilla changed the emotional balance of the family. Sophie witnessed the moment, saw Catherine's face alter, and later described it as the instant neutrality became impossible. Camilla chaired the meeting 3 weeks before the Windsor reception. Catherine, Sophie, Princess Anne, and several senior advisors had gathered to coordinate major charitable patronages led by royal women. A patronage is an official connection between a royal figure and a charity, often used to attract attention, support, and public trust. The discussion appeared administrative, but the proposal before them carried far greater consequences. The new structure placed final approval for joint initiatives under Camilla's office. Catherine's team would have to submit future projects through the Queen's household, even when those plans were connected to William's long-term program. The princess understood immediately that her independence was being reduced, while the future monarchy was expected to operate through the present court. Catherine asked whether the arrangement weakened the authority of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Camilla did not hesitate. There can only be one senior royal woman setting the direction while the king reigns. The sentence struck harder, because it was delivered so calmly. Catherine closed her folder, placed her pen precisely across its cover, and said she would not compete for dignity inside her own family. She then left without raising her voice. Sophie watched in stunned silence as the future queen walked away from a room supposedly built around cooperation. Sophie remained behind after the others departed. She asked Camilla whether the proposal was truly about administrative order. The queen consort answered that Catherine needed to understand the difference between popularity and authority. According to Sophie's documented private account, that reply confirmed the rivalry was personal as well as institutional. The deeper danger appeared later. Sophie discovered a continuity clause, a provision allowing an arrangement to remain active even after circumstances change. It would preserve Camilla's influence over the charitable council as William and Catherine assumed greater responsibility. The control was not temporary. That evening, Sophie repeated the exchange to Edward. Her voice shook as she admitted she had watched Catherine treated as a rival rather than a future queen. Edward listened, and the trusted confidant finally understood that silence would protect the wrong person. William found Catherine's unopened folder at Kensington Palace, the pen still resting across it like a boundary. He wanted to challenge the proposal immediately. She asked him not to act. Sophie made no such promise. Catherine had chosen restraint to protect the family, but Sophie had begun to believe that restraint was allowing the wound to deepen, and when she finally faced Camilla, neither woman was willing to step back. The confrontation took place without cameras, secretaries, or prepared statements. Sophie entered Camilla's private sitting room, determined to speak calmly. But the moment Catherine's name was mentioned, years of suppressed tension surfaced. Camilla believed she was defending the authority of the crown. Sophie believed she was defending a woman being quietly diminished. Between them stood a tea tray that neither touched, a closed door no aide dared approach, and one question that could no longer be avoided: who truly deserved their loyalty? Sophie had requested 10 minutes alone, 2 days after the council meeting. She arrived without Edward, and asked every member of staff to leave, making clear that she was speaking as family, not as an agent of another household. A royal household is the team of aides serving an individual member of the family, and removing those officials stripped the conversation of excuses. The Duchess began with a direct appeal. She asked Camilla to withdraw the new approval structure and restore Catherine's independent authority. Collaboration, Sophie argued, could not survive if the future queen had to seek permission for work tied to her own role beside William. Camilla heard betrayal. The queen consort accused Sophie of becoming Catherine's defender while forgetting the years of ridicule, isolation, and hostility she herself had endured. Her voice remained controlled, but her hand tightened around the chair as old wounds rose beneath every word. Sophie refused to be silenced by guilt. She acknowledged Camilla's suffering, then said past cruelty did not justify inflicting a quieter form of it upon Catherine. Pain, she warned, should have created compassion, not a desire to control the woman who would eventually follow her. Camilla then issued a warning. Openly choosing Catherine, she said, would be interpreted as rejecting the Queen and undermining Charles. Sophie answered that standing beside the princess did not threaten the monarchy. Forcing her into submission did. The silence hardened. Sophie rose and delivered the words she would later repeat at Windsor. "When Catherine is isolated, I will stand beside her, every time." Camilla's expression changed as she understood the decision was permanent. The queen consort lifted the teapot as if to end the meeting politely, then set it down without pouring. Sophie opened the door herself and left without farewell. Later, the Duchess told Catherine what had happened through a documented private conversation. The future queen became distressed and said she never wanted Sophie's relationship with Camilla destroyed for her sake. Sophie answered that Camilla's choices, not Catherine's needs, had caused the division. Sophie had spoken from loyalty, but the next battle would not be decided by emotion alone. It would depend on who possessed the power to impose the disputed arrangement and who could quietly dismantle it. Charles was accustomed to resolving disagreements through patience, private persuasion, and carefully balanced language. This dispute offered him no comfortable middle ground. Supporting Camilla risked alienating William, Catherine, Sophie, and Edward. Rejecting her plan would humiliate the woman who had stood beside him through decades of controversy. Alone in his study, the king read the disputed proposal twice, removed his glasses, and finally understood that the document was not merely administrative. It had become a test of his judgment as husband, father, and sovereign. Charles held enormous influence over royal household structures, but William and Catherine maintained an independent office tied to their future constitutional role. Constitutional means connected to the rules and responsibilities surrounding the crown. Camilla could advise, coordinate, and support the monarch, yet she could not permanently place the Wales household beneath her own authority without the king's written approval. Edward approached Charles privately and warned that Sophie's reaction reflected wider concern. Anne was even more direct. She said placing the future queen beneath a permanent council controlled elsewhere would create resentment, confusion, and the appearance of rival power centers inside the monarchy. Both siblings understood that what looked like administration could quickly become a struggle over succession. Charles felt trapped between loyalty and consequence. He wanted to protect Camilla from another humiliation after years of public hostility. Yet he also recognized Catherine's importance to William, their children, and the monarchy's future. Defending one woman too completely could emotionally estrange the other and fracture his relationship with his son. William entered the study without anger. The prince said Catherine would continue serving with dignity, but he would not allow her role to be reduced merely to reassure anyone unsettled by her popularity. His restraint made the warning stronger. He was not asking for special treatment. He was demanding respect for a boundary that should already have existed. Charles then noticed the final approval page remained unsigned. Camilla's team had begun describing the structure as settled, creating the impression that his consent was guaranteed. That assumption disturbed him almost as much as the proposal itself. Sophie's confrontation changed the balance. Her resistance showed Charles that approval could divide Edward, Anne, William, and the women at the center of royal life. Camilla entered and saw the unsigned page beside his hand. She asked whether he trusted her judgment. The king looked down and replied that trust did not remove his duty to consider the damage a decision might cause. Charles capped his fountain pen and locked the proposal inside a drawer. The king's pen had remained still, yet the palace immediately began moving around that silence, and Camilla soon discovered that delayed authority could feel almost identical to defeat. By sunrise, nothing had officially changed, yet almost everything felt different. A meeting disappeared from the calendar. An aide was reassigned. Catherine's office received confirmation that its charitable program would remain independent, and inside Camilla's household, the silence became colder with every passing hour. Sophie's declaration had not created the crisis, but it had exposed how many people were waiting for permission to resist. The palace was now rearranging itself around a conflict no one could publicly acknowledge. The joint charitable council meeting was cancelled before staff arrived at their desks. Catherine's pending projects were returned to her own office for direct approval, while aides were instructed to describe the change as a scheduling adjustment. A charitable council is a group that coordinates royal support for public causes, but everyone involved understood this was not about calendars. Her independence had been restored before any formal ruling was announced. Senior officials began contacting William's team directly, instead of routing messages through Camilla's office. The shift appeared small, yet it removed the informal authority that had allowed one household to influence another. Catherine regained control quietly, through changed emails, corrected diaries, and instructions no longer requiring outside approval. Camilla learned of the cancellation at breakfast. She stopped stirring her tea, and asked who had authorized it. When the aide answered that the order came from the king's private secretary, the queen consort said nothing. The senior aide speaks for the monarch on sensitive household matters, which meant Charles had allowed the change. Sophie carried consequences of her own. She admitted to Edward that her declaration might damage his relationship with the king. He placed his hand over hers and said he would rather face temporary anger than watch her betray her conscience for appearances. The Duchess heard the support, but she also understood that loyalty now had a cost for him. Camilla considered withdrawing from several joint engagements. In a documented private conversation with her sister, she said appearing beside people who had rejected her leadership might look dishonest. Such a withdrawal would make the private conflict visible, threatening the public unity Charles still hoped to preserve. Catherine refused to let that happen through humiliation. She instructed her staff not to celebrate the cancelled structure and rejected a proposed briefing that framed the outcome as her victory. The princess insisted that Camilla's dignity remain protected. At the next family luncheon, an aide moved Sophie's place card away from Camilla and beside Catherine. The trusted confidant hesitated before sitting. Across the table, the queen watched without comment. William later thanked Sophie, but warned that visible camps could damage everyone. She agreed, then reminded him the division had existed long before anyone named it. The palace had started choosing sides, but Catherine did not want a faction built in her name. She wanted the cycle of rivalry to end, and she would now ask Sophie to help her end it. The turning point did not occur in a council chamber or before the king. It came inside Catherine's private sitting room, where she and Sophie met alone as rain struck the windows and unanswered messages waited outside the door. Sophie expected gratitude. Instead, Catherine asked her to make one final sacrifice: stand beside her without turning Camilla into an enemy. In that quiet conversation, the future queen revealed that victory meant nothing if it required another woman's public destruction. Catherine had asked William and Edward not to attend. No aides remained, no notes were taken, and both women agreed the conversation would stay personal. A private sitting room is a smaller royal space used for confidential family discussions away from formal business. That mattered because neither woman wanted another household turning honesty into strategy. Catherine explained what she truly wanted. The princess needed her office protected from outside control, but she did not want Camilla stripped of dignity or pushed from Charles's side. Different centers of influence could exist inside the monarchy, she said, provided none attempted to dominate the others. The future depended on boundaries, not humiliation. Sophie's guilt surfaced almost immediately. The Duchess admitted that her Windsor statement had come from anger as well as loyalty. She had watched Catherine being diminished for too long, but she now feared that her declaration had turned private pain into a public weapon and made reconciliation harder. Catherine embraced her. She said Sophie's words had given her strength when she felt invisible, yet she asked the trusted confidant never to defend her by repeating the same cruelty they opposed. Loyalty could be fierce without becoming destructive. Then Catherine revealed her plan. She intended to meet Camilla directly and demand the permanent withdrawal of the disputed structure. In return, she would publicly affirm the queen consort's place beside Charles and reject every suggestion of competing queens. Sophie agreed. Her loyalty to Catherine would not change, but loyalty did not require permanent hostility toward Camilla. She would support a settlement that protected the future queen without humiliating the woman already beside the king. Catherine lifted the unopened folder from the earlier council meeting and handed it across. A continuity clause is a rule designed to keep an arrangement active even after circumstances change. Together, they tore the unsigned clause in half and returned the remaining pages for rewriting. Sophie took Catherine's hands and repeated softly, "You will not stand alone again." Catherine answered that neither should Camilla provided support was no longer mistaken for submission. Catherine had transformed Sophie's declaration from a battle cry into an offer of peace, but everything now depended on whether Camilla could accept a future she no longer completely controlled. The palace had hoped the disagreement would remain behind closed doors. By morning, Sophie's words were dominating broadcasts, newspaper stands, and conversations outside royal gates. To some, she had defended Catherine with extraordinary courage. To others, she had publicly wounded a queen already burdened by decades of judgment. Yet beneath the noise, one image captured the nation's true fascination. Catherine and Sophie walking side by side, while Camilla entered separately. Three women carrying the monarchy's unresolved history in full public view. Palace communications officials released a brief statement insisting that the royal family remained united in service. A communications office is the team responsible for official statements and public messaging. The wording avoided Sophie's declaration and made no mention of the cancelled council structure. That silence only strengthened the belief that something serious had happened. Commentators quickly framed the dispute as a clash between inherited authority and earned affection. Catherine's supporters saw Sophie's loyalty as protection for the monarchy's future. Camilla's defenders viewed the statement as an unnecessarily personal rejection of a woman who had spent years fighting for acceptance beside Charles. Outside Victoria Station, commuters stopped before a newspaper stand displaying a full-page photograph of Sophie moving her chair beside Catherine. The headline read, "Sophie chooses her side." The image spread faster than the disputed words, because it required no explanation. The Duchess had physically crossed the room and made her allegiance visible. A small crowd gathered near Windsor Castle, carrying flowers for Catherine and handwritten messages thanking Sophie. One elderly woman placed 2 white roses together at the barrier and said during a recorded broadcast, "That is what sisters should do." Her words transformed a palace dispute into a simple public story about protection and loyalty. Sophie watched the coverage with Edward, and grew troubled when a presenter described Camilla as isolated inside her own family. The trusted confidant had wanted to defend Catherine, not inspire a campaign of punishment. Edward reminded her that public emotion could not be controlled once private pain became a headline. Camilla received a folder containing the morning's front pages. The Queen Consort paused over the photograph of the moved chair, closed the file, and instructed her aide not to issue any attack against Sophie. Anger might have defended her pride, but it would also confirm every accusation. Charles proposed a joint public appearance, yet Catherine refused to perform unity before genuine peace existed. Hours later, Camilla sent her a handwritten note, agreeing to meet without staff. She added one condition: Sophie must also attend. The world had already delivered its judgment, but the only verdict capable of healing the family would come from Catherine, Sophie, and Camilla themselves. The final meeting began with no embraces and no rehearsed courtesies. Catherine sat opposite Camilla, while Sophie remained between them, not as a judge, but as the woman whose declaration had forced every hidden resentment into the open. For several moments, no one spoke. Then Camilla admitted that she had mistaken control for security. Catherine acknowledged that silence had allowed bitterness to grow, and Sophie made clear that her loyalty would never change, but neither would it be used to destroy another woman. Catherine, Camilla, and Sophie had entered a small Windsor drawing room alone. Charles, William, and Edward waited elsewhere, allowing the three women to determine the settlement without husbands, advisors, or household pressure. A household is the staff and office serving an individual royal figure. Removing those officials ensured no private apology could be rewritten as strategy. Camilla abandoned the disputed plan completely. Catherine's office would retain full authority over its charitable programs, and the continuity clause was removed permanently. A continuity clause is a provision designed to keep an arrangement active as roles change. Without it, no future council could quietly place the princess's work beneath the Queen's office. Camilla then admitted through a documented account of the private conversation that Catherine's popularity had awakened an old fear of never being fully accepted. The Queen Consort had tried to secure her place by controlling the structure around her. Instead, she had created the rejection she feared. Catherine refused the language of victory. She told Camilla that she did not want her chair, title, or humiliation. The future queen wanted enough freedom to serve, protect her children, support William, and prepare for responsibilities that would one day become unavoidable. Sophie delivered her final verdict. She would always stand beside Catherine whenever the princess was isolated or unfairly diminished. But loyalty, the Duchess said, also required compassion and the courage to prevent friends from becoming what had once wounded them. Camilla extended her hand across the table. Catherine held it briefly, and Sophie placed her hand over both of theirs. The gesture did not erase mistrust, but it ended the struggle over Catherine's position. Charles signed the revised arrangement that evening. William thanked Sophie privately, Edward embraced her, and Camilla returned to public duty without authority over the Wales household. At their next engagement, Sophie arrived beside Catherine, then crossed the entrance hall to greet Camilla first. The three entered together, not pretending the conflict had never existed, but proving it no longer controlled them. The sentence that first sounded like a declaration of war ultimately became something greater, a promise that Catherine would never again stand alone, and a warning that the crown could only endure when loyalty was guided by courage, restraint, and compassion. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.